Hello, my beautiful friends. How are you doing today? I hope you're having a wonderful day. My name is Cami, and today we are going to be talking about a true crime case that I had never heard of. So whenever I look for my true crime cases that I want to cover, generally I lean towards cases that I've either never heard of or that I know almost everything about, just because I like to have as much information as possible going into the cases, or I like to know absolutely nothing at all. So I have this note on my phone that pretty much covers all of the true crime cases that I want to talk about, and it's a long one, and my friends will sometimes help me out. They're like, hey, have you heard of this case? And I'm either like, yes, I've heard of it, or no, I've never heard of it. And sometimes it'll lead me down this like rabbit hole, and sometimes I won't look at it at all. Well, I'll look at it, but sometimes it just doesn't go anywhere because there's either not enough information or too much conflicting information. But Google actually helped me find this one, and let me tell you, it's an unsolved murder case, and it's from April of 1981, and I don't know what about it that really drew me to it, but it's a very interesting case, and it's known as the Keddie Cabin Murders. Is that how you say it? Keddie? That's how it looks. Anyway, so without further ado, I'll stop rambling and let's get directly into the video. So, Keddie, California, I had never heard of it. It is a very, very small rural, I can't say that word. It's a resort town in Sierra Nevada in California, Nevada. In 2010, there were only 66 people living there. And people didn't really live in Keddie. Like I said, it's a resort town, so their main focus was on like tourism. People didn't really live there. So the Sharp family was living in cabin 28, and the Sharp family consisted of Sue and her 5 children. John, Sheila, Tina, Rick, and Greg, and all of them were under the age of 16. I think John was the oldest, and he was 15 at the time of this case. Sue was born March 29th, 1945 in Springfield, Massachusetts, and she was actually married to a man named James Sharp. He was active duty Navy, and they moved around a lot because, you know, anytime you're in any kind of armed forces, including the Navy, you move around a lot. That's just what everyone knows, even if you've never been in any of the armed forces. So finally they settled down on the East Coast, and it's reported that once they settled down on the East Coast, that's really when their marriage started falling apart. It's rumored that once they settled down in California, or on the East Coast, that James kind of became really abusive towards Sue, and there was rumors that he was molesting his 2 daughters. Two daughters. She had 2 daughters. And they divorced, and that was that. After she left James, she went to California, which is where her brother Don lived, and when she moved there, she rented this small trailer that Don used to live in this place called Claremont Trailer Village, and it's in Quincy, California. After they lived in Quincy, they decided that they wanted a bigger place, so they moved to Keddie, and that's where they moved into cabin 28. Side note, this is totally unrelated, but anytime I read cabin with a number after it, I think of cabin, B4 from The Ring, except this isn't a horror movie, this is real life, but that's just a side note. Anyway, they wanted someplace bigger, and this cabin that they moved into was bigger than the trailer that they had previously lived in. Like I said, all of her kids were under the age of 16. John was 15, he was the oldest, and the other kids were aged 14, 12, 10, and 5, with Greg being her youngest child. He was the 5-year-old. April 11th, 1981. All 5 of the kids had plans with their friends. John was with his friend Dana in Quincy for part of the day, and they had planned to go to this party later that night, and the other kids were in other cabins throughout the day. Sheila and Tina were at cabin 27, which is where the Seabolt family lived. Rick and Greg, the two youngest, were playing with another family's son named Justin Smart, and him and his family lived in cabin 26. Once it got later in the day, Justin, Rick, and Greg all went back to the Sharp family cabin, and Sue had agreed to let Justin spend the night that night, and between 9:30 and 10 p.m. is when Tina came home. Sheila was the only one staying out that night. She wasn't staying at the Sharp family cabin. She was spending the night at a neighboring cabin. And at the same time that Tina came home, it was said that John and his friend Dana were seen trying to hitchhike home. And it's always so weird to me how often I hear people hitchhiked in the 80s, because it's like, now it's like we know so much about crime that like most people wouldn't even think to hitchhike. But in the 80s, it seems like that's what everyone was doing, because anytime I read a crime that happened in the 80s, it's like, oh, they were hitchhiking. Anyway, that's just a side note. When Sheila got home the next morning, it was around 7 a.m. And when she pulled up to the house, well, when she came back to the house, it seemed like everything was normal from the outside. The curtains were drawn and all the lights were out. So she just assumed that everyone was still sleeping, because it was 7 a.m., so it was still pretty early. But then Sheila walked inside, and it was very obvious that everything was not normal. Tina was missing. Rick, Greg, and Justin were all found in a connecting bedroom. Well, it said adjacent bedroom, so that's like a connecting bedroom, right? Yeah, it's an adjacent bedroom. I'm not sure who called the police. I don't think it was Rick, Greg, or Justin, because they're all young kids, but, you know, it could have been them, or it was more likely that it was Sheila that had probably called the police, since she was 14. Either way, law enforcement was called, and when they got there, they had actually found the body of John first. John's the oldest son. Remember, he's the 15-year-old. His wrists and his ankles were bound with electrical cords and medical tape. His throat had been slit, and he had also been stabbed multiple times. And in addition to this, his head had also been bashed in with what was later determined to be a hammer. Sue's body was the next one to be found. She was nude from the waist down, and she had a yellow blood-soaked blanket covering her whole body. She had been stabbed multiple times in the chest and in the throat. Her head had also been beaten in, but her head had not been beaten in with a hammer. Hers had been beaten with what was later determined to be the butt of a Daisy 880 BB gun. And they had only identified that because a small piece of the gun had actually broken off. Sue had been bound in the same way that John had, but the difference is that she had been gagged with her underwear, and I want to say a blue bandana is what else she had been gagged with, and they were shoved all the way in the back of her throat. And it had been covered with, I think, duct tape. Sue had been stabbed in the throat so deeply that the knife had actually nicked her neck. So it hit bone. That's awful. Police determined that, thankfully, I mean, the whole case is awful, but thankfully, even though she was naked from the waist down, she had not been sexually assaulted before she was murdered. Now, I know we're not even all the way through, but this screams to me like a personal attack. This level of anger that this person had towards Sue, it doesn't seem like a stranger. A stranger attack usually doesn't happen like this. It seemed like whoever did this to Sue, to John too, but especially to Sue, she seemed like she had gotten the worst of it. It seemed like it was a personal attack, at least in my opinion. Police had also found a third body, which was discovered to be the body of John's friend Dana, you know, the one that he was with earlier that day that he was supposed to go to the party with. They said that Dana's head had been bashed in with a hammer, just like John's had. He was found face down on a sofa pillow, and when they found him, his body had also been bound in the same way that John's had, but he actually showed signs of manual strangulation. So whereas John and Sue had been stabbed and had their heads bashed in, Dana actually was manually strangled, which was that also seems really, really personal. This whole case is awful. Like, strangling is also a very, very personal way of murder. If you've ever watched any kind of true crime show like Deadly Women, I believe it was Candace DeLong. She's like a criminal profiler. She said that 2 of the most personal ways of murder are strangulation and stabbing. So I think it was, this is an unsolved case, but I really think it was someone that knew the family that did it. So initially, it had been reported that Justin, Rick, and Greg, you know, the 2 youngest sons, and I guess Rick's friend that was staying the night, it had initially been reported that they had slept through the attacks, but later on that was retracted. And when Sheila had seen the scene, like whenever Sheila walked into her house, into her cabin, she had went and grabbed a neighbor from the Siebel residence who had gotten the boys out of the window of the bedroom that they were found in, that connecting bedroom. Now that I think about it, I guess the neighbor could have called the cops. Remember earlier I said I don't know who called the cops? I guess it was Sheila. I guess it could have been the neighbor. It was probably the neighbor. So, James Siebold, who was the guy that Sheila had went and grabbed, and that was also who Sheila was spending the night with. She was spending the night at the Siebold residence. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's where she was. So, it's reported that he had actually walked through the cabin to see if anyone was alive before he called the police. So, it's believed that because he walked through the cabin, that could have potentially contaminated evidence from this crime scene. So autopsy showed that Sue and John had died from the stabbing and from the blunt force trauma, whereas Dana had died from strangulation. So for 6 days after the murders, law enforcement had actually closed off the cabin so that way they could collect their evidence, they could investigate the crime scene, see if they could find anything that would point to who did this to this family, who committed this horrible crime. 2 knives and 1 hammer were found at the crime scene, and one of the steak knives was determined to be what had ended up killing the family, and this steak knife was bent at 30 degrees. Do you know how hard it is to bend a steak knife? You have to really be getting in there, and that's just horrible. The only area that had been disturbed that was outside the living room was Tina's room, which had blood on the sheets in her bed. The walls of the living room had also been stabbed, and it was determined that the living room is where the murders had been taking place. But can we just talk about that this person stabbed the living room walls too? Whoever did this was just really, really angry at this family for some reason. So I haven't really addressed what happened to Tina yet. Remember, she's still missing at this point. On April 22nd, 1984, which was 3 years after the murder, I want to say it was like 3 years and exactly 11 days after the murders, this man named Ronald Padrini, he was picking up these recyclables in this place called Feather Falls, which is in Butte County, which is, I think, about 60 miles outside of Keddie, where the murders took place. While he was doing this, he found a human skull, he found a blue jacket, a child's blanket, Levi jeans, and an empty surgical tape dispenser. Immediately, he called the police, and they investigated it. They took the skull and they took all the evidence in, but they couldn't really find any lead. They couldn't really figure out who this skull belonged to. But they got an anonymous tip. We still don't know who made this tip to this day, that said that the remains belonged to Tina Sharp. So a forensic pathologist came in and sadly confirmed that, yeah, the remains did belong to Tina, which is so unfortunate. And in 2013, a deputy that was assigned to the case, so this was still being investigated as of 2013, an investigator assigned to the case said that they had actually found a recording of the 911 call. Now, Sheila and the Siebold family, when they were questioned, they both said that they didn't hear any kind of commotion outside, but a family that lived by in cabin 16 the couple both said that they had heard commotion outside at about 1 o'clock in the morning, and when they were investigating to see if anything had gone missing from the cabin, they found that Tina's jacket, her shoes, and a toolbox which contained various tools were missing from the cabin. The cabin showed no signs of forced entry, and they found an unidentified fingerprint on, like, the handrail leading towards the back door on the stairs. And the telephone to the cabin had been left off the hook. This crime scene is so weird to me. I get the hammer. The hammer is probably what was used to kill them, I imagine. But why would you steal a toolbox? I'd imagine if you were, like, a suspect in a case and police came and, like, searched your house and they found this toolbox with this hammer missing and the murder weapon was a hammer, wouldn't you not want the police to find that? So the police actually interviewed Justin, you know, the little boy that was, like, staying the night, to see if he had seen anything. I don't know if they interviewed all the other kids that were there too. Like, I don't know if they interviewed Rick and Greg too. It just says that they interviewed Justin specifically. And I guess maybe that's because of the fact that Justin said he had seen something. Now, Justin actually gave conflicting accounts. Once he said that he was awake for it, but then he also said that he had dreamed details of the murder. So police decided that they were going to put this kid under hypnosis, because let's put a 11-year-old under hypnosis. I don't know if that would ever stand up in a court of law. I think maybe the reason that he said that he dreamt details of the murder is because, have you ever, like, woken up in the middle of the night and because you heard a noise or something and you think you dreamed it, but you didn't? So I'm thinking maybe that's why he said that he had dreamt details of the murders. So they put this kid under hypnosis to try and get more details out of him. And he claimed he had heard sounds coming from the living room where the murders took place. So that's consistent. Now, what he said was he had gotten up to investigate the sounds because, you know, he wakes up, he hears sounds coming from the living room. And he saw Sue in the room. He says he saw Sue in the room with two men. One had a mustache and short hair, and the other was clean-shaven, had long hair, and had glasses. After he says that he saw Sue with these two men, he says that's when John and Dana supposedly got home and began arguing with these two men. And then he says Tina comes into the cabin, and that's when one of the men takes her from the cabin out the back door. Again, this lines up with details of the case, so I really think that this kid was awake for it. Once Justin gave descriptions of the men, for some reason, police got a sketch artist that had no background in forensics and no artistic ability whatsoever to make sketches of these two suspects. Which, why would you do that when you have access to, like, the best sketch artists, actual criminal sketch artists? Which, okay, for someone with no artistic ability, if you look at this sketch, he did a pretty good job, but I don't have any artistic ability, and I can't draw worth a crap. But I'm also not trying to draw suspects for a murder case. So it's weird to me. I don't understand why they didn't just get a real sketch artist. When the police did the press releases to discuss these murders and to say that they had a suspect, which, you know, a press release is basically where they go on the TV and they're like, this is what we have information. You know what a press release is. They said that they had two suspects and that they were between 20 and 30 years old. One was between 5'11" and 6'2" with dark blonde hair. And the other one was between 5'6" and 5'10", and he had dark black hair that was greased. I don't know if they meant, like, greased back or if they meant it was just greasy hair. Now, keep in mind this was the 80s, so anytime anything happened, it was like satanic panic. That was like the height of the satanic panic whole thing. So when it came out how brutal these murders were, the first thing that a lot of people jumped to was ritualistic murder. But police were quick to shut down those rumors. They were like, absolutely not. This is nothing ritualistic. And then they also shut down rumors that it had anything to do with drugs, like a drug deal gone bad, because there were no drugs found and there was no drug paraphernalia found. Police spent a lot of time on this case. I want to say it was something like 40,000 hours, and in December of 1983, the police confirmed that these murders were not related to the serial killers Henry Lee Lucas or Otis Toole. So police had 6 suspects that they questioned, and at the top of their suspect list was Marty Smart, which was Justin's stepdad. And Marilyn Smart, who was Justin's mother, obviously, said that in her basement, she had Tina's bloody jacket that she turned into the police, but there's no record of this. There's no record that she turned in a bloody jacket, so I don't know if she lied about having it or if she lied about turning it into the police. They had also gave a polygraph to another suspect who had recently left Keddie, and the polygraph came back clear. But the thing about polygraphs, okay, this is a side note. The thing about polygraphs is not only are they not reliable because they don't take into account a whole lot of factors, but they're also not, I mean, this was the 80s, but now in 2021, we know that they don't hold up in a court of law. So, supposedly, Marilyn had provided the police with a lot of clues to lead police away from Marty. So in 1996, police actually questioned another suspect named Robert Joseph Silveria Jr. They thought he might have been a suspect, but it doesn't say if he was cleared or not. I assume he was. And in 2008, Marilyn actually claimed that Marty and his friend Bo were responsible for the murders. So it's like, okay, Marilyn, why'd you wait this long to say something? Marilyn claimed that on the evening of the murders, she had left Marty and Bo at a local bar around 11 p.m. and went home to go to sleep. And at around 2 a.m., she woke up to find the 2 men in her house burning some kind of item in the wood stove that they owned. She also claimed that Marty hated John with a burning passion, which I don't know what some grown man could hate a 15-year-old so much for that he might possibly murder him, but alright. Police said that they had questioned Marty and that Marty had passed a polygraph test, which once again, polygraph tests are not reliable, but they didn't know that in the 80s. And also, another thing about polygraphs, more proof that they're unreliable. Didn't Paul Bernardo, whenever they questioned him and he volunteered to give them a polygraph, and whenever that whole thing was going on, didn't he pass a polygraph test when they asked him if he was the Scarborough rapist? Anyway, in June of 2000, Marty actually died of cancer in Portland, Oregon, where he was living, and Bo died in Chicago in 1988, so at this point they can't really question either of them about any of this. Now, back when these murders took place, supposedly Marty had lost a hammer, and in 2016, a hammer matching the description of the one that he had lost showed up in this pond. It was taken into evidence, and the sheriff, the current sheriff, who was 16 at the time of these murders and was a very close personal friend of the Sharp family, said that the hammer had to have been placed there intentionally. Like, with the location of this pond, there was supposedly no way that it could have just gotten there. Someone had to have, like, dumped this hammer. Now, here's the really suspicious thing. In 2016, there was an article published that showed letters from Marty to Marilyn that detailed the troubles that they were having in their marriage. So, this letter said, and I quote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now that I've bought it with 4 people's lives, you tell me that we're through? Great. What else do you want?" Now, somehow, this letter was overlooked. Plumas County is where this Keddie is, which is where this crime took place. Plumas County Special Investigator Mike Gamberg was very vocal about the initial investigation. He said that he believed that police did not do a good job with this investigation and that they could have done better, which I have to agree with him. So, Marty was going to this therapist, this counselor, And this therapist also alleged that Marty had confessed to the murders of Tina and Sue, but that he didn't kill the boys. Supposedly, he had stated that he had only wanted to kill Sue, but that he had to kill Tina to keep her from identifying him. Case closed, right? Marty confessed to doing it. We got him, and he's dead now, so they can't arrest him, right? Case closed. Wrong. In 2018, Mike Gamberg, the special investigator, actually said that DNA evidence from a piece of tape found at the crime scene matches that of a living suspect. So this case is still being investigated. And that's kind of where it ends right now. Now, supposedly, police have new information about this case. So we'll just have to keep an eye on it and see where that goes. What I don't understand, though, why didn't police use this confession that this therapist gave them? Because, okay, I know that there's, what's the word? Where counselors and, therapists can't break confidentiality. Privilege! That therapists have privilege. I understand that, but aren't they supposed to report to the police if someone confesses to harming themselves or another? I think this counts as harming another. Here's my opinion. See, at first I was like, oh yeah, Marty did it. He confessed to it. There's no way he didn't do it. But you take a look at that letter that he sent her, that whole I've bought your love with 4 people's lives, and the fact that they have DNA from a living suspect. I think it was Marilyn. I think Marilyn did it. I think Marilyn killed them. Because, okay, Marty could have helped her with it. Because it said they had 2 suspects. There were definitely 2 people that did it. So I'm wondering if maybe Marty was the suspect that had, the greasy hair, the greasy hair and was taller, and Marilyn was the one with the longer hair. That makes sense, right? Anyway, we'll have to see where this goes. So, that is the awful story of the Sharp family and the Keddie Cabin Murders. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments. Do you think Marty did it? Do you think Marilyn did it? Do you think someone else did it entirely? I want to know what you guys think. So, I hope you all have a great day, and I will see you in my next video. Bye!